Jake Morrison wiped the sweat from his forehead as he guided his ship through the busy space lanes around Kepler Station. The massive trading post looked like a metal city floating in the darkness, with hundreds of ships coming and going like busy ants around their hill. His cargo hold was full of rare metals from the mining worlds, and he needed to sell them before heading to New Haven Colony with medical supplies. The Liberty's Edge was not much to look at. She was 20 years old, had patches on her hull from micrometeorite hits, and made strange noises when the artificial gravity switched on. But she was his ship, and she had never let him down. Jake had bought her with his savings after leaving the Earth Navy, and they had been partners ever since. As he requested docking permission, Jake noticed something odd in the comm chatter. The usual mix of languages and species seemed quieter than normal. Traffic control assigned him a berth on the outer ring, far from the main commercial docks. He shrugged and followed the guidance beacons toward his assigned spot. Kepler Station was home to beings from all over the galaxy. The main corridors were wide enough for the massive Goliath traders, while smaller passages allowed the tiny Whisper folk to move around safely. The air was kept at a temperature and pressure that most species could handle, though everyone had to wear breathing gear suited to their needs. Jake sealed up his ship and walked down the boarding ramp. He wore his usual outfit of work pants, a simple shirt, and sturdy boots. A small breathing unit clipped to his belt fed him the oxygen mix that humans needed. He had made this run dozens of times and knew exactly where to go to get the best prices for his cargo. But as soon as he stepped into the main corridor, something felt wrong. The usual noise and bustle of the station seemed muted. Conversations stopped when he walked by. A group of tall, blue-skinned Altarians who had been laughing at something quickly went silent and stepped aside to let him pass. Their large eyes followed him as he walked by, but none of them spoke. Jake had faced some prejudice before. Not all species were friendly to humans, and some saw them as newcomers who did not belong in civilized space. He had learned to ignore the stares and focus on his business. But this felt different. These beings were not looking at him with dislike or curiosity. They looked almost afraid. A small, furry creature that looked like a cross between a cat and a monkey hurried past him, chittering in its own language. Jake caught a few words in Galactic Standard. Something about the human and dangerous. He frowned but kept walking toward the commercial district. The markets of Kepler Station were usually loud and chaotic. Merchants called out prices in a dozen languages while customers bargained and argued over deals. But as Jake entered the main market area, the noise dropped to whispers. Stalls that had been busy moments before suddenly seemed to empty as their owners found urgent business elsewhere. Jake approached a familiar stall run by a Zephyrian trader named Kolvex. The bird-like being had bought cargo from him before and always paid fair prices. But when Kolvex saw him coming, all four of his arms began shaking. "Captain Morrison," Kolvex said in a voice that was barely above a whisper. I did not expect to see you here." "Just business as usual, Kolvex. I have some rare earth metals if you are interested." Jake pulled out his cargo manifest and held it out. Kolvex stared at the paper like it was a poisonous snake. His feathers, which were usually bright blue and green, had turned a dull gray color. Perhaps this is not a good time for trading. Maybe you should consider returning to human space." Jake looked around the market. Other traders were watching their conversation from a safe distance. Some were talking into communication devices, probably warning others that a human was on the station. "What is going on here?" Jake asked. "You all are acting like I have some kind of plague." Kolvex's head feathers twitched nervously. "Captain Morrison, surely you know about the current situation. The Ravagers have issued their demands to the Federation. All member species are preparing for either surrender or—" He paused, unable to finish the sentence. "What Ravagers? What demands?" Jake had been in hyperspace for 3 weeks, traveling between remote mining worlds. He had not received any news from the main communication networks. The Zephyrian trader stared at him in disbelief. "You do not know. The Ravagers emerged from the galactic core 2 months ago. They have already destroyed 3 entire star systems. They demand that all Federation worlds surrender completely or face total annihilation. They are the most powerful force the galaxy has ever seen." Jake whistled low. That sounds bad. But what does it have to do with me? I am just a cargo hauler. But you are human, Kolvek said, as if that explained everything. So? The trader looked around nervously, then leaned closer. Captain Morrison, everyone knows that humans are the Federation's ultimate weapon. When the situation becomes impossible, when all hope is lost, the Federation calls upon the humans. No species has ever survived a conflict with your kind. Jake laughed, which made Kolvex jump backward. Ultimate weapon? Kolvex, I think you have been listening to too many stories. I am a merchant captain. I haul cargo and try to make enough credits to keep my ship running. I am not a weapon. But the stories are just stories. Jake shook his head. Look, I need to sell this cargo and pick up medical supplies for New Haven Colony. Are you buying or not? Before Kolvex could answer, the station's communication system crackled to life. A nervous voice spoke in Galactic Standard. All beings please remain calm and proceed to designated safe areas. This is not a drill. All beings please remain calm. Jake looked up at the speakers. What is that about? Long-range sensors, Kolvex whispered. They must have detected something. High above in the station's command center, Commander Veltar of the Zephyrian Collective was having the worst day of his long career. The massive Ravager fleet had just dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the system. His sensor operators were reporting ship counts that seemed impossible. Hundreds of massive warships, each one capable of destroying his station with a single barrage. Sir, his communications officer called out. The Ravager fleet is hailing us. Put them through, Veltar said, settling his 6 arms on his command. Share. The main screen filled with the image of a creature that looked like it had been built for war. Standing 9 feet tall with 4 powerful arms and natural armor plating, Admiral Kethmore of the Ravager hegemony was exactly what nightmares were made of. I am Admiral Kethmore, the creature growled. This station and all beings within it now belong to the Ravager hegemony. You will surrender immediately and prepare to transfer half your population to our ships as slaves. You have 1 standard hour to comply. The transmission ended, leaving the command center in stunned silence. Veltar looked at his tactical display. The station had defensive weapons, but they were designed to deal with pirates and smugglers, not a fleet that could crack planets. He had 2.3 million beings under his protection, representing dozens of species. He had no choice but to surrender. Prepare the surrender codes, he ordered quietly. Down in the market, Jake was still trying to understand what was happening when the second announcement came through the speakers. All civilian ships prepare for immediate departure. This is an emergency evacuation order. Evacuation? Jake looked at Kolvex. Because of these Ravagers? The trader was packing his goods with frantic speed. Captain Morrison, you should leave immediately. Get to human space and warn your people. The galaxy's about to change forever. Jake watched the panic spreading through the market. Beings were running in all directions, some toward the docks, others toward the station's interior. Children were crying, and parents were trying to gather their families. It reminded him of disaster footage he had seen from Earth's history. No, he said quietly. What? Kolvex stopped packing. I said no. I am not running away. Jake looked around at the frightened beings. These people need help, not another person, abandoning them. But Captain Morrison, you cannot fight an entire fleet. Maybe not, Jake said, checking his sidearm and heading toward the docks. But I can try. As he walked away, Kolvex whispered a prayer to whatever gods might be listening. He had heard the stories about humans, but he had always thought they were exaggerated. Now he was beginning to wonder if they were not exaggerated enough. Jake Morrison walked through the chaos of Kepler Station with steady steps. All around him, beings were running toward escape pods and evacuation shuttles. The air was filled with the sounds of different languages as people called out to their families and friends. Emergency lights flashed red, casting strange shadows on the metal walls. He passed a group of small, green-skinned traders who were loading their most valuable goods onto hover carts. One of them looked up at Jake and froze. The creature said something in rapid clicks to his companions, and they all stopped what they were doing to stare. Human, one of them whispered in broken galactic standard. The human stays. Why does the human stay? Jake paused. Because running away does not solve anything. The traders looked at each other with wide eyes. One of them pulled out a small recording device and started speaking into it in his own language. Jake could not understand the words, but the tone was urgent, almost excited. He continued toward the docking bays. The Liberty's Edge was parked in Section C7, and he needed to check his ship's systems. If he was going to face impossible odds, he wanted to know exactly what he was working with. In the command center, Commander Veltar was watching the evacuation progress on his screens. Thousands of beings were boarding escape shuttles and civilian ships. The lucky ones would make it to hyperspace before the Ravagers grew impatient. The unlucky ones would become slaves or worse. "Sir," his sensor operator called out, "we have a problem." "What now?" Veltar asked, his voice tired. "There is a ship moving toward the outer docking ring. It is not evacuating. It appears to be preparing for launch." Veltar looked at the tactical display. A small dot was highlighted near Section C7. The computer identified it as the Liberty's Edge, registered to one Jake Morrison, human. "The human is still here," Veltar said, more to himself than to his crew. His communications officer turned toward him. "Sir, should we contact him? Tell him to evacuate?" Veltar thought about it. Part of him wanted to order the human to leave, immediately. But another part of him, the part that remembered all the stories he had heard since childhood, wondered what would happen if the human stayed. No, he decided. Let him make his own choice. Jake had reached his ship and was running through the pre-flight checklist. The Liberty's Edge was not a warship, but she had some basic defensive systems. Her shields could handle small asteroid impacts and solar radiation. Her weapons were designed to deal with pirates, not military fleets, but they were better than nothing. He also had something that most merchant ships did not carry. During his time in the Earth Navy, Jake had learned that space was dangerous in ways that had nothing to do with enemy ships. Pirates, system failures, and natural disasters could all kill you if you were not prepared. So he had modified his ship with extra armor plating, backup systems, and a few surprises that were not on any official registry. As he worked, Jake's comm system picked up chatter from the evacuation shuttles. Most of it was in languages he did not understand, but some was in Galactic Standard. The beings were talking about him. "The human ship is not leaving," said a voice with a thick accent. "My cousin saw him walking toward the docks. He was not running. He was walking like he was going to work." "Maybe he does not understand the danger," suggested another voice. "No. Humans always understand danger. They just do not care about it. The same way we do." "Is it true what they say about humans? That they cannot be defeated?" "My grandfather fought in the Kepler Rebellion 40 years ago. He said the human soldiers were like demons. They would not stop fighting even when they were outnumbered 100-1. Jake turned off the comm chatter and focused on his work. He was not a demon or a super soldier. He was just a man with a job to do. The medical supplies in his cargo hold were needed at New Haven Colony. Sick children were waiting for the medicine he carried. He was not going to let some bullies with big ships stop him from making his delivery. The Liberty's Edge lifted off from the docking platform and moved into space around the station. Jake could see the Ravager fleet in the distance, a collection of dark shapes against the stars. Even from this far away, they looked huge. His ship's computer was trying to count them and kept revising the number upward. Admiral Kethmore stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Destroyer of Worlds. Through the massive windows, he could see Kepler Station floating in space like a metal fruit ready to be picked. His tactical officers were reporting that most of the civilian ships had fled the system. Good. He preferred his conquests to be clean and efficient, Admiral, his communications officer called out. "We are receiving a transmission from the station. They are ready to surrender." "Excellent. Begin transport operations for the new slaves." "Sir, there is one more thing. Our sensors detect a single ship that is not evacuated. It appears to be moving toward our position. Kethmore looked at his tactical display. A tiny dot was indeed moving away from the station and toward his fleet. The computer identified it as a human merchant vessel. The bridge fell silent. Every Ravager on the command deck turned to look at their admiral. In the background, someone whispered a curse in the old tongue. "A human," Kethmore said slowly. "They sent a human." His tactical officer, a younger Ravager named Grix Tal, looked confused. "Sir, it is just one small ship. Should we destroy it?" The older warriors on the bridge looked at Grix Tal with something close to pity. The young one had not heard the stories. He did not understand what they were facing. "No," Kethmore said. "Open a channel to the human ship. I want to speak with their champion." Jake was checking his weapon systems when the communication request came through. The voice that spoke was deep and threatening, with an accent he had never heard before. "Human vessel, this is Admiral Kethmore of the Ravager Hegemony. Identify yourself." Jake keyed his microphone. "This is Captain Jake Morrison of the merchant ship Liberty's Edge. You are in violation of Federation space laws. Move your ships out of this system immediately." There was a long pause. Jake could hear voices in the background, speaking in the same strange language. Finally, Kethmore spoke again. "Captain Morrison, do you know who you are addressing?" "I am the conqueror of 1,000 worlds. My fleet has turned entire star systems into dust. Surrender now, and I will grant you a quick death." "Not interested," Jake replied. "You are blocking a major trade route and threatening innocent people. That makes you pirates in my book." Another pause. This time Jake could hear what sounded like argument among the Ravagers. When Kethmore spoke again, his voice was different, less confident. "Human, you are alone against my entire fleet. This is suicide." "Maybe," Jake said, checking his flight path. "But sometimes you have to make a stand. My grandmother used to say that the only thing necessary for evil to win is for good people to do nothing. Your grandmother was a fool. My grandmother survived the food wars of 2387 and helped build the first colony on Mars. She was a lot of things, but a fool was not one of them." Jake cut the communication and armed his weapons. The Liberty's Edge was small and fast compared to the massive Ravager ships. If he was going to do this, he needed to use every advantage he had. On Kepler Station, Commander Veltar was watching the confrontation on his screens. His communications officer was recording everything, sending the data to Federation headquarters through hidden relay beacons. If they all died today, at least someone would know what happened. "Sir," his tactical officer said quietly, "the human ship is accelerating toward the Ravager fleet." Veltar nodded. He had expected this. The stories all said the same thing about humans. When they decided to fight, they fought until the end. No surrender, no retreat, no compromise. "All station personnel to emergency stations," he ordered. "If the human is making his stand, the least we can do is be ready to help." Jake Morrison flew his ship toward the largest concentration of enemy vessels he had ever seen. His hands were steady on the controls, his breathing calm and even. He was afraid, but fear was just another factor to consider, like fuel consumption or weapon charge levels. Behind him, Kepler Station waited to see what one human could do against impossible odds. Ahead of him, the Ravager fleet prepared to face something they had never encountered before. The battle was about to begin. Jake Morrison guided the Liberty's Edge through space toward the Ravager fleet. His ship looked like a tiny insect flying toward a swarm of metal giants. The enemy vessels were so large that his entire ship could fit inside one of their weapon ports. But Jake had learned something during his years in the Earth Navy. Size was not everything in a fight. Admiral Kethmore watched the approaching human ship on his tactical display. The small vessel was moving in a strange pattern, not flying straight like most ships would. Instead, it weaved back and forth, making sudden turns and speed changes that seemed random, but somehow felt deliberate. "What is it doing?" asked Grixtal, the young tactical officer. "It is trying to confuse our targeting systems," replied an older warrior named Vectar. "The humans are known for their unpredictable tactics." Kethmore studied the display more carefully. The human ship was indeed following a pattern, but not one that appeared in any military textbook he had studied. It reminded him of something, but he could not place what. "All ships prepare to fire," he commanded. "When the human enters our weapons range, I want every gun aimed at that ship." On the Liberty's edge, Jake was remembering his childhood on the farming colony of New Terra. His older brother Danny had been the local champion at a game called Dodge Runner, where players had to cross a field while others threw soft balls at them. Danny had taught Jake the secret: never move in straight lines, never repeat the same pattern twice, and always keep your opponents guessing about what you would do next. Jake doubted that Danny had ever imagined his little brother would use those lessons in a space battle, but the principle was the same. The Ravager ships were huge and powerful, but they were also slow to turn and needed time to aim their weapons. If he could stay unpredictable, he might survive long enough to do some damage. His ship's computer beeped a warning. "Entering enemy weapons range in 30 seconds. Jake took a deep breath and flipped several switches on his control panel. The modifications he had made to his ship over the years were about to be tested in ways he had never intended. Extra shield generators came online. Backup power systems activated and hidden weapon ports opened along the Liberty's edge's hull. "Come on, old girl," he whispered to his ship. "Let's show these bullies what a working ship can do." The first barrage from the Ravager fleet lit up space like a deadly fireworks display. Energy beams and plasma bolts filled the area where Jake's ship had been moments before. But the Liberty's edge was no longer there. Jake had thrown his ship into a diving turn that brought him under the enemy fire and toward the belly of the nearest Ravager destroyer. The enemy gunners tried to track his movement, but their massive weapons were designed to fight other capital ships, not a single small vessel flying like a drunken bird. Jake skimmed along the destroyer's hull, so close that he could see the details of its armor plating through his cockpit window. His own weapons, small by comparison but perfectly suited for precision work, lanced out at critical points on the enemy ship. Jake had studied Ravager ship designs during his approach, looking for weak spots. Every ship had them, places where important systems were not well protected. The Liberty's edge's laser cannons cut through sensor arrays and communication dishes. His missile launchers sent small but accurate warheads into engine cooling vents and shield generators. None of the damage was enough to destroy the destroyer, but each hit made the ship a little less effective. "What is happening?" Kethamore demanded, as reports flooded in from the damaged destroyer. "The human is targeting our weak points," reported his communications officer. "Sensors, weapons, engines. He is trying to disable rather than destroy." "Impossible. No one knows our ship designs that well." But Jake Morrison was not relying on stolen intelligence or secret knowledge. He was using something much simpler: common sense and experience. Every machine had vulnerable spots, whether it was a farm tractor, a starship, or a massive space station. You just had to know how to look for them. The Liberty's edge completed its attack run on the first destroyer and immediately turned toward a second target. Jake had learned something important during his first pass. The Ravager ships were powerful, but they were not designed to fight enemies that got in close. Their weapons had minimum range limits and their armor was thickest on the front and sides, not the top and bottom. "All ships, concentrate fire on the human vessel," Kethamore ordered. "Do not let it escape," but Jake had no intention of escaping. He dove his ship between two Ravager cruisers, using their own bulk to shield him from the weapons of other ships. The enemy gunners found themselves in an impossible situation. To hit the human ship, they would have to fire through their own vessels. Jake's ship danced through the fleet like a fighter in a crowd, too close to the enemy for them to use their heavy weapons effectively. He struck at communication relays, weapon control systems, and sensor arrays. Each attack was small, but together they began to add up. Commander Veltar watched the battle from Kepler Station with growing amazement. His tactical officers were providing a running commentary as they tracked the engagement. "The human has disabled the weapons on 3 ships, reported his tactical officer. 2 more have lost their main sensors. The flagship appears to be having communication problems." "How is this possible?" Veltar asked. "1 ship against an entire fleet?" "Sir, look at the tactical display. The human is not trying to destroy the enemy ships. He is making them unable to fight effectively. Without sensors, they cannot target him. Without communications, they cannot coordinate their attacks. Without weapons, they cannot hurt him. Veltar nodded slowly. It was brilliant, in its simplicity. The human was not fighting the Ravager fleet. He was taking it apart piece by piece. On the Destroyer of Worlds, Admiral Kethmore was beginning to understand why the galaxy feared humans. This was not the behavior of a normal warrior. A normal fighter would try to destroy enemy ships or retreat when faced with impossible odds. This human was doing neither. He was systematically crippling an entire fleet with surgical precision. "Sir," called his tactical officer, "the human ship is approaching our position." Kethmore looked at his display. The small human vessel was, indeed, heading directly for his flagship. But something was wrong. The ship's movement pattern had changed. Instead of the wild, unpredictable flight path it had been using, it was now flying in a straight line. "He is out of fuel," Grixtal said excitedly. "The human cannot maneuver anymore." But Vektar, the older warrior, was studying the display more carefully. "No," he said quietly. "Look at his speed. He is accelerating." Kethmore felt a cold fear creep into his heart as he realized what the human was planning. "All weapons, fire at the human ship. Stop him." The Destroyer of Worlds unleashed everything it had at the approaching Liberty's edge. Energy beams and plasma bolts filled space, but Jake Morrison was no longer trying to dodge. His ship's shields flared and sparked under the massive assault, but he kept coming. Jake's hands were steady on the controls as his ship shook around him. Warning lights flashed on every panel, and the smell of burning electronics filled the air. The Liberty's edge was dying, but she was going to complete one last mission. "Emergency beacon activated," his ship's computer announced in a calm voice that seemed strange given the circumstances. "Distress signal transmitted." Jake smiled grimly. The beacon would reach the nearest human colonies within hours. If he died today, at least someone would know what had happened here. And knowing humans, they would not let his death go unanswered. Dido. Liberty's edge struck the Destroyer of Worlds at full speed, her reinforced mining hull designed to break through asteroid rock. The impact sent shockwaves through both ships. Emergency klaxons wailed as the flagship's hull was breached in a dozen places, but Jake Morrison was not finished yet. As his ship broke apart around him, he managed to reach the manual release for his escape pod. The small capsule ejected just before the Liberty's edge exploded, taking a significant portion of the Ravager flagship with it. From Kepler Station, Commander Veltar watched the explosion bloom like a deadly flower against the stars. The human ship was gone, but so was the command section of the enemy flagship. The remaining Ravager ships seemed confused, no longer moving in coordination. "Launch. Rescue shuttles," Veltar ordered. "Find that escape pod." In the wreckage of his command bridge, Admiral Kethmore pulled himself to his feet. Half his crew was dead or injured, his ship was crippled, and his fleet was in chaos. One human in one small ship had done what entire battle fleets had failed to accomplish. But as he looked at the tactical display, Kethmore saw something that made his blood freeze. New contacts were appearing at the edge of the system. Ships were dropping out of hyperspace, and their identification signals showed they were all human vessels. The cavalry had arrived. The rescue shuttle from Kepler Station found Jake Morrison's escape pod floating in space among the wreckage of his ship. The pod's life support systems were still working, but barely. Inside, Jake was unconscious and bleeding from several cuts on his face and arms. The shuttle crew, a mix of different species, worked quickly to bring him aboard. "Is he alive?" asked the pilot, a blue-skinned Altarian named Zefka. "Yes, but he needs medical attention," replied the medic, a small furry being called Dr. Piptel. "Get us back to the station immediately." As the shuttle raced back toward Kepler Station, more ships continued to arrive in the system. They came from all directions, dropping out of hyperspace with flashes of light. Mining vessels, cargo haulers, passenger transports, and even a few small patrol craft, all of them flying human identification codes. Admiral Kethmore stood in what remained of his command center, watching the tactical display with growing alarm. His flagship was crippled, 6 of his destroyers were unable to fight, and now he faced an entirely new threat. The human reinforcements kept coming, their numbers growing every few minutes. "Sir," his surviving communications officer reported, "we are being hailed by the human fleet." "Put them through," Kethmore growled. The main screen flickered to life, showing the bridge of what appeared to be a scientific survey ship. A woman with short brown hair and calm eyes looked directly at him. Her uniform was simple and practical, not the elaborate dress of a military officer. "I am Captain Lisa Chen of the survey vessel Horizon," she said in a voice that was perfectly steady. "You have attacked one of our people. We want him back." Kethmore tried to project the same authority he had used to conquer dozens of worlds. "Human, you are outnumbered. My fleet consists of 200 warships. You have brought cargo ships and science vessels to a battle." "We brought what we had," Lisa replied simply. "And 200 ships is not that many. My grandfather told me stories about the Battle of Titan, where 50,000 human ships fought against impossible odds. 200 seems manageable." "Your grandfather was a liar. No species has ever built 50,000 warships." Lisa smiled, and somehow that expression was more frightening than any threat. "Admiral, you clearly do not understand humans very well. We do not build warships because we plan to fight wars. We build them because sometimes wars find us anyway, and when that happens, we are ready." The screen switched to show a tactical display of the human fleet. Kethmore stared in disbelief as the computer analysis scrolled past. These were not military vessels, but they had been modified in ways that his intelligence officers had never seen. Cargo ships with military-grade shields, science vessels with weapon systems that should not exist, mining ships with armor that could stop battleship. "Guns, impossible," he whispered. "Every human ship that travels in deep space is prepared for trouble," Lisa continued. "Pirates, system failures, natural disasters. We modify our vessels because space is dangerous, and we learned long ago that it is better to be prepared than—" "Sorry." Kethmore realized with growing horror that he was not facing a military fleet. He was facing something much worse. An entire civilization that treated war as just another problem to solve. On Kepler Station, Jake Morrison was beginning to wake up in the medical bay. His head felt like someone had used it for hammer practice, and his left arm was in a cast. But he was alive, which was more than he had expected after ramming a battleship. Dr. Piptell was checking his vital signs with a handheld scanner. The small medic's fur was standing on end, which Jake had learned was a sign of excitement or stress. "How do you feel, Captain Morrison?" the doctor asked. "Like I got hit by a freight train," Jake replied, sitting up carefully. "What happened? To the Ravager fleet?" "Your people came for you," Dr. Piptell said, pointing to a window that looked out into space. "Many ships. They are talking to the Ravager Admiral now." Jake looked through the window and saw dozens of human vessels surrounding the damaged Ravager fleet. He recognized some of the ship types: a passenger liner from the inner colonies, several mining ships from the asteroid belt, and what looked like a deep space research vessel. Not exactly a battle fleet, but they were here. "They came because of me?" Jake asked. "They came because you called for help," Dr. Piptell explained. "The emergency beacon you activated reached 17 different human colonies. Every ship within 50 light-years changed course to come here." Jake was quiet for a moment, thinking about that. Dozens of ships, hundreds of people, had dropped everything they were doing to respond to his distress call. Most of them had never met him. They came simply because he was human and he needed help. In space, the conversation between Lisa Chen and Admiral Kethmore was continuing. More human ships were arriving every few minutes, and the Ravager Admiral was beginning to understand that his position was becoming impossible. "What do you want?" he asked finally. "We want our people back, and we want you to leave this system," Lisa replied. "We also want assurance that you will not threaten any Federation worlds again." "You ask me to surrender my entire campaign based on the actions of one human pilot?" "No. I am asking you to surrender based on what will happen if you do not." Kethmore looked at his tactical display again. The human fleet now numbered over 80 ships and more were still arriving. His own fleet was in poor condition after Jake Morrison's attack, and his flagship was barely capable of fighting. "You would start a war over one man?" he asked. "Admiral, you started this war when you attacked our colonies and threatened innocent people. We are just finishing it." Behind Lisa Chen, other human voices could be heard giving orders and coordinating their ship's movements. Kethmore listened carefully and realized something that chilled him to his core. These humans were not following any military protocol he recognized. They were improvising, making up tactics as they went along, and somehow it was working. "Sir," his tactical officer whispered, "the human ships are moving into attack formation." Kethmore watched as the human fleet arranged itself around his forces. But it was not any attack formation he had ever seen. The cargo ships moved to block escape routes while the science vessels positioned themselves to provide sensor coverage. The mining ships, with their heavy armor and industrial cutting tools, moved in close where they could do the most damage. It was not the work of trained military officers. It was the combined effort of dozens of independent captains who had decided to work together, and somehow that made it even more dangerous. "We surrender," Kethmore said quietly. "What was that?" Lisa asked. "I said we surrender," Kethmore shouted. "The Ravager hegemony withdraws from this system and all Federation space." "Good choice," Lisa replied. "Now about our pilot." 20 minutes later, Jake Morrison was standing in the docking bay of Kepler Station, watching as the human fleet prepared to escort the Ravager ships out of the system. His arm was still in a cast, and he had bandages on his face, but he was mobile. Captain Lisa Chen had come aboard the station to check on him personally. She was younger than he had expected, probably in her early 30s with the kind of calm confidence that came from years of deep space travel. "Captain Morrison," she said, extending her hand. "I am Lisa Chen. We heard you had some trouble with pirates." Jake shook her hand carefully. "Thank you for coming. I was not sure anyone would get my signal in time." "We always come," Lisa said simply. "That is what we do." "But why? Most of you do not even know me." Lisa looked surprised by the question. "Captain Morrison, you called for help. You stood up to bullies who were threatening innocent people. Why would we not come?" Jake looked out the window at the human ships. Dozens of ordinary people in ordinary ships who had risked their lives to help a stranger. It was exactly the kind of thing humans did, and exactly the kind of thing that made the rest of the galaxy nervous. "Besides," Lisa added with a smile, "the galaxy needs to remember that there are some rules you do not break. And the most important rule is simple. Do not mess with humans, because we always look out for each other." In the distance, the Ravager fleet was already jumping to hyperspace, fleeing the system with their tails between their legs. Admiral Kethmore would remember this day for the rest of his life, and he would make sure his people never forgot the lesson they had learned. Never touch the humans. Ever. 3 days after the battle, Jake Morrison was sitting in Commander Veltar's office on Kepler Station. His arm was healing well, and the doctors had removed most of the bandages from his face. He still looked like he had been in a fight, but he was alive and mostly healthy. Commander Veltar poured 2 cups of tea from a pot that steamed with an unpleasant herbal smell. The Zephyrian's feathers had returned to their normal bright colors, and his 4 arms moved with their usual graceful coordination. But his large eyes still held a look of wonder when he gazed at Jake. "Captain Morrison," Veltar began, setting 1 cup in front of Jake. "I must ask you a question. Did you know what would happen when you decided to fight the Ravager fleet?" Jake picked up his cup carefully with his good hand. The tea tasted like mint mixed with something he could not identify. "What do you mean? Did you know that other humans would come to help you? Did you know that your species has a reputation throughout the galaxy?" "No to both questions," Jake said honestly. "I just did what seemed right at the time. As for the reputation thing, I still do not understand what everyone is talking about." Veltar leaned back in his chair, all 4 of his hands wrapped around his own cup. "Captain Morrison, may I tell you a story?" "Sure. 50 years ago, there was a human trader named Bill Cooper who worked the Outer Rim routes. He was buying grain from a farming world called Theta 7 when pirates attacked the planet. The local authorities asked all civilian ships to evacuate immediately. Jake nodded, listening. Bill Cooper refused to leave. He said the farmers had been good to him over the years, and he was not going to abandon them. So he stayed and helped organize the defense. One old cargo ship and one stubborn human against a pirate fleet. What happened? The pirates retreated. They said later that they had heard stories about humans and they did not want to risk fighting one. Bill Cooper became a legend, and the stories grew with each telling. Veltar took a sip of his tea and continued. There have been dozens of incidents like that over the years. A human diplomat who refused to back down from threats. A human colony that survived impossible odds through sheer determination. A human rescue ship that saved survivors from a disaster that everyone else said was hopeless. But those are just people doing their jobs, Jake protested. Exactly. Veltar's feathers rustled with excitement. That is what makes you so frightening to the rest of us. You do impossible things and act like they are normal. You face overwhelming odds and refuse to quit. You help strangers without expecting anything in return. Jake was quiet for a moment, thinking about what Veltar had said. So the galaxy is afraid of us because we are stubborn? Not afraid, Veltar corrected. Respectful, there is a difference. We have learned that humans are dangerous to fight and valuable to have as friends, so we developed a simple rule. Do not provoke the humans. That seems like a reasonable rule. It has served us well for decades, until the Ravagers decided to ignore it. Jake finished his tea and set the cup down. What happens now? Will there be more trouble? I do not think so, Veltar said. Word of what happened here is spreading throughout the galaxy. The Ravagers attacked a human, and within hours they faced an entire fleet of human ships. They surrendered without achieving any of their goals. Other potential enemies will remember this lesson. There was a soft chime from Veltar's communication system. He pressed a button with one of his hands. Commander Captain Chen from the human fleet is here to see you, came the voice of his aide. Send her in, Veltar replied. Captain Lisa Chen entered the office, still wearing her practical work uniform. She looked tired but satisfied, like someone who had completed a difficult but important job. Captain Chen, Veltar said, rising from his chair. How may I help you? We are preparing to leave the system, Lisa said. Most of our people need to get back to their regular jobs, but I wanted to speak with Captain Morrison first. She turned to Jake. I have a message for you from the human colonies. The Council of Worlds has voted to give you the Civilian Service Medal for your actions here. Jake looked surprised. That is not necessary. I was just doing my job. That is exactly why you deserve it, Lisa replied with a smile. You treated protecting innocent people as just another part of your job. That is what makes you a hero. I am not a hero. I am a cargo hauler who got lucky. Lisa and Veltar exchanged glances. The Zephyrian commander made a sound that was his species' equivalent of laughter. Captain Morrison, Lisa said, that attitude right there is why the galaxy respects us. You fought an entire fleet, saved millions of lives, and prevented a war. And you think it was just luck. Well, what else would you call it? Courage, determination, the willingness to do what is right even when it is dangerous. Jake was quiet for a moment. Anyone would have done the same thing. No, Veltar said softly. Anyone would not. That is what makes humans special. You believe that anyone would do the right thing, so you do it without thinking about the cost. Lisa nodded in agreement. Captain Morrison, do you know what the other species call us when they think we cannot hear them? What? The stubborn ones. Because once we decide something is right, we do not give up. Ever. Is that a bad thing? It depends on your point of view, Lisa said. If you are a pirate or a conqueror, it is very bad. If you are someone who needs help, it is very good. Jake thought about the human ships that had come to his rescue. Dozens of people who had dropped everything they were doing to help a stranger. Mining crews who had left profitable asteroid claims. Scientists who had abandoned important research. Passenger ship captains who had changed course and disappointed their customers. They really came just because I called for help? He asked. They came because you are human, Lisa said simply. That makes you family, even if we have never met. That is another thing that makes other species nervous about us. Our loyalty to each other. But that is just normal. For humans, yes. For the rest of the galaxy, it is remarkable. Commander Veltar refilled their teacups and settled back in his chair. Captain Morrison, may I give you some advice? Of course. Do not change. Do not try to become something other than what you are. The galaxy needs humans to be human. We need someone who will stand up to bullies. We need someone who will help strangers. We need someone who believes that doing the right thing is more important than being safe. Jake looked out the window at the stars. In the distance, he could see the human fleet preparing for their jump to hyperspace. Soon they would scatter back to their homes and jobs, returning to ordinary lives after doing something extraordinary. I have a delivery to make, Jake said finally. New Haven Colony is waiting for medical supplies. Of course you do, Lisa said, smiling. Do you need an escort? Some of our ships are heading in that direction. No, thank you. I think I can handle it from here. Jake stood up and shook hands with both Lisa and Veltar. As he walked toward the door, Veltar called after him. Captain Morrison? Yes? Thank you. For all of us. Jake nodded and left the office. He had a schedule to keep and people counting on him. It was just another day in the life of a human cargo hauler. Behind him, Veltar and Lisa watched through the window as Jake walked toward the docking bays. In a few hours, he would be back in space, carrying supplies to people who needed them. It was ordinary work done by an ordinary man, and that was exactly what made it extraordinary. The story of Jake Morrison and the Battle of Kepler Station spread throughout the galaxy in the weeks that followed. It joined the collection of human legends that kept the peace in space. But Jake himself never heard most of these stories. He was too busy working, delivering cargo to the growing human colonies and helping to build a better future among the stars. The galaxy's rule remained the same. Do not touch the humans, because when you mess with one of them, you mess with all of them. And that was a lesson that no species ever forgot.